and welcome back to the TFTuesday Podcast. My name is Sil. I hope y'all have been having a good week and that everyone has been staying hydrated. Today, I have two returning guests that I'm very excited to have back aboard to chat a little bit about some shared topics of interest. So, to start off, Cameron, would you like to reintroduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Cameron. I'm also a curious fox, and I'm a hobbyist artist. I was the veterinarian who talked about why you can't use science to TF. So I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we did crush some dreams there, unfortunately, but that's okay. And Toledo.
Hi, I'm Toledo. I was on and I spoke about photo manipulations and enclosed cognition, and why getting dressed is transformation.
That did spark some spicy discussions, I must say.
Yes.
I'll die on the hill.
Yeah, you don't think it's TF, do you, Cameron?
I don't even think magical little transformations are TF, so.
Well, we'll put that to the side for a minute. We might come back to that. But yeah, I'm really excited to have you both on. And in particular, I was really interested to chat with you both about asexuality and how that intersects with transformation, because I think it's a topic that doesn't always get broached with a lot of nuance. And given that we're all on the ace spectrum, I know that our own individual relationships with that term differs quite significantly as well. So I was curious if you would like to chat a little bit about how you personally define asexuality and how you relate with it.
So, yeah, it's one of those things that's what is kind of a minority. It's really varied in experience. And I guess the way I consider it, the way it's typically defined is someone who does not experience sexual attraction. But there are like kind of various levels to that, including like someone who does not necessarily desire to have sex or does not have the interest in that, or at least does not have the interest in a kind of culturally normative way or degree. And that's how I kind of think of it. And in my experience, that's kind of what mine has been, where it's just, I was utterly baffled hearing that these were things that people could not like help thinking about or really wanted. I thought that like it had to be a sequence of like conscious choices to like want to have sexual relations with someone, not something that came to mind. And so I was like, oh, this is, I guess I'm the odd one out.
Yeah, it's kind of an alien experience.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, speaking of alien experiences, it's like I identified with Spock as a kid, and I'm like, oh, yes. Yeah, yeah, the guy who does not experience attraction, save every 7 years, but that's...
Yeah, that's a whole other
Yeah.
story.
Alien biology. Anyway, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Cameron?
Sure. I'm much more of a definitionalist, I guess. I like to have rigid definitions to follow. So the one that usually gets tossed around is the same one where you don't experience sexual attraction. But if you like try looking into it, like most people who are ace eventually do somewhere probably in their mid to late teens to early 20s when they're really questioning things, there's a ton of variety and like a huge spectrum of where you can fall on it. Is pretty interesting, to be honest. So yeah, a lot of media portrays it as like the totally clueless person who is never interested in it or even repulsed by it. So it is kind of, you can end up a lot of different places from just having, and like there's even like one that's called demisexual, where you have to develop a really specific kind of relationship with somebody before it to ever happen. So I think I would probably put myself closer to there. And a lot of people think it just means no sex drive, and it doesn't mean that either. So usually when I am trying to explain it to people, I say it's a lot like being hungry but not having an appetite. So you look in the fridge and nothing looks good, but pretty much forever nothing will look good. And so you can never really satisfy that kind of hunger. And it also was kind of baffling to me that people would experience this and had this interest. And I remember not being made fun of, but kind of sort of in high school for kind of feeling this way back before I even knew about it. And I was like a super, because I didn't have any interest in it, I was just like a super late bloomer to what people were even talking about. And so, like, I still am often baffled on, like, other than companionship, what the point of going on dates and having a girlfriend, boyfriend, significant other, what have you, is. And so it just kind of it's an interesting kind of strange, I don't know, category, personality trait or
Yeah.
something.
No, I think it's interesting you mentioned that too. I know that in my experience, and I guess this probably also doesn't seem to, I often get this question in that the content that I often produce online does not seem to align with me saying I'm also asexual. Um, and I think that, what's really interesting, like both of you have kind of alluded, is that there's a lot of different varieties of being asexual, and the definition encompasses so many different things. There was this comic that I think really well sums up where I sit. And it was like, I forget the artist, I apologize, but it was basically a moth character. And it was like one of those like Drake meme formats where it was like, sex in practice, nah, but sex as a concept, yeah. And that's kind of where I sit, in that I do like find those sorts of situations to be interesting, but I have never actually felt any sort of outward sexual attraction. And the focus of a lot of what I find interesting is actually all basically solo stuff. So it's always been interesting to me that, I guess, misconception to some degree, like what you were saying, Cameron, of like, it's like always being hungry but never having an appetite. It's like you just don't find some of these things interesting, even if in your mind, to some degree, you might still enjoy certain things. And I think that's kind of a difficult topic for a lot of people to grapple with, particularly as it relates to transformation media, because a lot of it is kind of, for lack of a better term, it is often sexually charged for a lot of people. So I always think it's interesting that when we have these conversations talking about what asexuality can mean, there's still a lot of confusion and a lot of people who just don't understand how that could be missing. And I feel like that's a broader topic as well of just society in general, but particularly within TF media, I've noticed that often it bumps up against that, particularly if you have created any sort of content that is not safe for work. And then it's like, well, why would you even produce this if you're not into it? And it's like, well, it's hard to explain, you know?
Yeah, this gets into another thing that kind of is adjacent to asexuality and the talk about paraphilias. And I prefer the term paraphilia because not only is it kind of a little more clinical, and I just like the sound better than something like fetish or kink, but it also kind of allows for a middle ground where it expresses something other than like sexual desire. Just like how asexuality helps us understand that there are different modes of attraction that in many people are just collapsed into a single level of, oh yes, my attraction via visuals, touch, romance, desire for sex, all kind of coincides in the same objects. Like with paraphilias, you can get those different levels. Like you can get someone who's interested in it because it's like visually or like imaginatively appealing. Like for me, one of the things that I love about transformation is proprioceptive imagination. Just like imagining being in a body and feeling different like limbs. It's really cool to imagine having wings, for instance. Or you could be like romantically interested in it. Like it's something that you like to see in stories. It connects with some part of your being. Actually, I saw a tweet the other day that I thought explained this really well. And I'm going to use the word paraphilia instead of the word kink that the tweet uses, but it says if you are ever confused by a paraphilia, usually the answer is related to a metaphor that the paraphilia expresses. And usually that metaphor is something like, I am desired, or I have power and respect, or I no longer need to make decisions. Or I would add something like, I feel more like myself. They're themes that I think can come out particularly through the metaphor of transformation, and things that are kind of illuminated in their diversity by being willing to pull back the layers and see that what we term sexuality is related to a lot of human experience that we don't often call, sex.
No, that's a really good point. And I think that oftentimes, like you said, and I think that tweet you kind of like quoted is so appropriate to when it comes particularly to a lot of people's interest in transformation. Like, there are things that can make a concept attractive that doesn't necessarily bleed into sexual, or maybe it can, but only in like the realm of fiction. And in particular, I think it's interesting in that so much of transformation at its core can remain just in the fictional realm and still be of deep interest. I know that obviously for a lot of us, getting to experience that to some degree, like you kind of suggested, would be like, this is me feeling more comfortable as myself, or this is me assuming an interesting form that I would like to inhabit. And all of those things can be tied to something sexual, but they don't have to be. And having an interest in those things doesn't necessarily bleed into the other. And I think that it's that kind of connection between the two that I think people don't understand how it could be disconnected for others.
Yeah, for some folks, certain clothing choices are related to sex. For others, it's not.
Yeah.
It's
This is very true.
the variety of human experience. It's This is also why I prefer the word orientation as opposed to sexual orientation, because it allows for the diversity of degrees in which, like, the way we are drawn to themes or to each other are experienced in human life.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So then, drawing on the realm of human experience, what have your kind of experiences been in terms of having asexuality bump up against navigating online fandoms like transformation, in which these sexual topics can often dominate conversations? I don't know, Cameron, what has your experience been like on that front?
Yeah. So sometimes it can be a little annoying or frustrating or just a little bit of a kind of like feeling a little bit left out. But I don't know if it's like just a mindset kind of thing, but I'm happy to listen because these people clearly have different experiences than me, and that's can be interesting, and you can learn something from it or get a better idea of what these kinds of things mean to them. So it can kind of help you be a little more, I don't know, empathetic with them. Not to say like they're suffering and or
Yeah,
anything,
yeah.
but just to try to understand their point of view. So that can be interesting, but sometimes it can be kind of annoying because some people some people have that view where like their main goal is some sort of sexual thing, and they can kind of twist what you are talking about sometimes. Like one thing I think is cool is, and like I'm gonna catch some flack for this just because of like my experience with it, but like pony play seems kind of interesting to me, but I really don't like the sexual aspect. And so like I think it would be fun because I don't know very much about horses and I want to learn more about horses. I think it would be fun to be in the position of being the horse and like somebody who knows something about horses actually teaching you about horses through this kind of fun pseudo TFE route. But like the moment you say pony play, a lot of people assume it's like fetish gear and sex related and all these kinds of things, and it's like, no, can I please just be like goofy but also learn something about horses at the same time and just have some fun? I don't want this to go in that direction. I just want to like play to be a horse a little
Yeah.
bit.
It's funny. The way you kind of phrased it reminds me of another meme I've seen on Twitter where it's like the person's trying to like initiate a normal conversation and then like someone responds with like a just completely out of left field horny response, and it's like, I'm just trying to talk about this thing I have an interest in. Like, can we please not veer in that direction right away, especially when I haven't given an indication of being open to that?
Yeah, and I've definitely gotten that kind of response before. It's like, okay, so I guess conversation's stopping
Yeah.
here. or I'll try to like regroup, but if it goes again, I'm done. I'm not putting in the
Yeah,
effort here.
exactly. I think sometimes the problem is often that we all have our own kind of internal boundaries, and sometimes the conversation will go in a direction that is bumping up against those, and oftentimes people just don't ask, like, what are your boundaries around a certain topic? And goodness knows that can come up quite a bit sometimes with commissioning and with commissioners. And I know, Toledo, you've had some thoughts on that too.
Yeah, so I was going to mention that, yeah, I've had it, like conversations where we're just talking about something and the other person will like take it a direction I'm not comfortable with. I know at least one time I was like, hey, no, let's not go there. And the person got really mad at me. It's like, no, it's a wrong baseline assumption to like think that what you're getting out of it or what you're interested in is what everyone is. But yeah, for a while I did a lot of transformation commissions. It was the majority of my commission work. This was, oh my goodness, 8 years ago. Holy cow. And farther back. And in addition to not being on kind of social media platforms that allowed me to meet people, it reduced the number of people that I could interact with. And a lot of the people I interacted with were, fine people, but what we shared in common was an interest in transformation, and seldom was there anything deeper that could nourish a friendship. And often I kind of burned out on transformation stuff for other people, except for friends, because I didn't enjoy the feeling of kind of being used that way. Like people were polite and nice and often fun, but it just I around the same time I discovered the Furry Basketball Association, and not only was it like a shared creative venture, but it was connected to a community of people who are interested in creating together, and that just fired up my mind and showed me kind of what my, I guess, online furry experience could be like. And so I didn't get that before when I was just doing transformation commissions. Now I have plenty of transformation friends, and most of what I do transformation related now is, with friends because of these reasons. We see eye to eye, we play off each other, and it's fun and mutually like enjoyable.
Yeah. It definitely sounds like, particularly with how you viewed the Furry Basketball Association, what you were looking for was just inherently something that was a lot more collaborative. And you're still able to do that with friends, but that wasn't ever really what commissioning or taking on commissions really felt
Right.
like.
Exactly. It felt like I was just, filling an order.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I know that, I have many wonderful commissioners and I love them all. I know that sometimes when you are doing a commission, it can be very much just focused on what the other person wants. And so it can be a little bit draining from a creative perspective at times. I know that, for myself, when I do commissions, I spend a lot of time on them, not because I don't want to. I'm spending a lot of time because I want to do a really good job because it's for someone else. But it's almost like, there are things that I might let go in my own personal stuff, but I know I can't for a commission because, this is something that someone's requested. There's a level of quality they're expecting, and I feel like, I want to meet that quality. And so it then almost becomes like a weight to some degree when you're working on the piece. And, to be clear, there's plenty of commissions I've enjoyed working on, but it's a different dynamic. And I definitely feel like, in terms of what you're saying, like it's a lot less collaborative and it can bump up against uncomfortable topics if the person you're interacting with is trying to steer things in certain directions when you're just trying to be professional. So,
Yeah, pulling it back to the kind of orientation conversation, it's easier to know where friends are coming from and establish boundaries with friends than with, commissioners. And so that's partly why I feel better around friends. with these topics. They know what my boundaries are, I know what theirs are, and we just are able to enjoy each other's company without crossing those.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
That's one of the reasons that I really like doing trades with friends, because you both get something fun out of it, and you still kind of have a little bit of the pressure to do good work and not kind of slack off like you might for a personal piece. But you know that it's just with somebody you understand and you have an idea of what they want, and you can go in with a little more, I don't want to say freedom, but with more clarity on what the outcome is going to be. And then at the same time, they're going to be doing the same for you. And then when you finally exchange your trade, you're like, oh, this is awesome. Oh, this is awesome. And it's just a great little feeling that you don't necessarily get from commissions, because having something be a job and feel like a job definitely puts a different kind of pressure and a different kind of mental spin on the project.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely enjoy trades for that reason as well. And, you know, especially when it comes to like photo manips, there's even like a greater level of collaboration on those because it's like, you're working on figuring out what the stock should look like and like talking about the concept beforehand. And then like, the other person has to go away and actually take the picture. I genuinely find those to be really enjoyable, and there's a lot to be gained for both parties out of it. So then, thinking about all of this in summary, there's plenty of things I think that there are to appreciate around transformation from like a purely aesthetic, psychological, and intellectual perspective. So my question is there a way that we can elevate those focuses through the work that we make if that is kind of more of the angle from which we're coming from? And do others have that responsibility too, or is that kind of left up to us?
I think it's good to have a degree of this in the way we approach our work. I know one way I do this in the transformation work I do now is not only kind of working on it with friends, but also keeping vibes that I'm comfortable with. So I'll often want to depict like happy TFs or like funny ones because that's something that I'm comfortable communicating in, you know, out to the world.
Yeah, funny TFs in my opinion are always amazing. It adds a degree of levity that I find in general is a lot of fun, and the boundaries oftentimes are a lot more clear around those because when you create something that's supposed to be, for lack of a better term, a meme, people are primed to have a positive and kind of jovial reaction and less so potentially you know, a more sexually charged reaction.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You're conditioning a response. And like in one college course we talked about how people create their audience by what they put out. Depending on the sort of material you put out, you are attracting people and conglomerating them around you because they are interested in that same material. Like if you want to have a more intellectually or psychological approach to transformation or one that you're more comfortable with, just put out the stuff that you're comfortable with and the people who attach to you and stick around will be the people who you gel with.
Hmm. No, that's a really good point, and definitely calling myself out a little bit because that is not the output I generally put out. So.
You're bringing it on yourself. You'll be your own
I am a
downfall.
little bit. I am a little bit. Because, I mean, look, if you're putting out, for lack of a better term, big dick energy in your pictures, I like that. That's the crowd you're going to
You're gonna get
attract.
big dick energy
You're this
back.
little Lombax who like is rolling down a snowy hill and just becomes a giant snowball.
Yeah, pretty much. And I'm barreling down that mountain, so it's too late now. But no, I think that's a good point as well. We do kind of create our audiences to some degree in terms of what we put out, and it also means that if you have been putting out material that people really like, and then you take a bit of a different spin, because of the material you've done in the past, you might actually be priming people to be more open to seeing a different take because they say, well, I really liked this person's work in the past. They did these things that really hit on those nails. And now conversely, maybe they're taking a bit of a different tact, and I wouldn't necessarily go for this at first blush if it came across my feed or what have you. Normally, I would just scroll past, but I have a connection, at least to some degree, a parasocial one, with the art that this person's been putting out. So now that they're trying something else, maybe I will actually give it more of a thought because I was already here for one thing. And now that something else is being introduced to me, maybe I'll sample it a little bit.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and that kind of resonates with what I've experienced. I've had folks who found me back when I was primarily doing TF stuff who have expressed interest in my other projects, which has been it's great. It's fun to have those things that persist over time.
Well, when you make a full anthro marching band, it's like, oh my god, this is awesome. I gotta get in on this.
Thank you. That one's been fun so far.
Yeah, I really like the football one. The football one was really good for me. I was like, this is my interests. Yeah. And Cameron, what are your thoughts on, I think, the relationship between the audience and the content you put out and kind of driving any sort of change, for lack of a better term, in terms of how people view these things?
Yeah, I think I agree. It's just kind of put out what you want, and eventually the people who will find that interesting will interact with you in the way that you kind of, or the vibes you set. So if you're just a safe for work artist, hopefully you won't get too much horny DMs. But I don't know. I like, for me at least, I just try to cultivate, like, I like TF from an interest way and an intellectual way. And there's an aesthetic component, and I like to do stupid memes and make things silly. So I hope I'm just kind of attracting those people. And that the lack of doing anything that I'm not very comfortable with will hopefully just kind of keep those kind of interactions away. As for like the whole community, I don't think, I don't know, this is me being like an individualist. We all have our things. We all are here for a certain reason, and I don't think it's like, as much as I would like to see more intellectual or silly or memey kinds of stuff and a little less sexual stuff, I don't think it's up to me, unless I'm specifically creating it, to tell people what they can and cannot do. Like, clearly, this is here for a reason. People are enjoying it. Go for it. But I would like to see maybe less. Like, there are lots of other story elements than just being horny for somebody, and there's a lot of exploration that can happen there. But at the end of the day, people can do what they want.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I mean,
do whatever makes you happy.
yeah. And to be clear, I'm not suggesting that we need to tell people what they should and shouldn't be into, but I do think that you both make a good point in terms of, like, you know, when it comes to like elevating the kind of content that you might like, to some degree the responsibility rests with you to kind of cultivate the sort of vibes that you want to have and kind of surround your space with. You know, as with many things, I feel like it comes down to the vibes. It really is all about the vibes.
Always has been.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And, I definitely think we should put out a manifesto saying exactly what people should and shouldn't do in transformation art. I think this would
Oh
be
my goodness.
I think it would be a productive use of time and would get no one upset.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone would be so happy with it. I'm sure not a single person would be upset with
Absolutely
that
not.
manifesto.
I mean, as the people doing the active podcast, I say that you have the final say and are qualified to write this manifesto, and that we should do a vote right now on who should be on the committee. And I vote both Toledo and I
Okay,
should be.
cool.
Perfect.
I second this. I'm very down.
There we go. Motion
Okay,
passes.
we've passed the
Stay
motion.
tuned for next week.
Yeah, we've passed the motion unanimously. This is now the council of TF, and we're gonna write a manifesto, and everyone has to agree with it because we said so.
This sounds great.
Yeah,
Nothing
will
will-
go wrong.
Okay, jinx.
Oh, amazing. Well, you know, I also wanted to touch on how kind of transformation interacts in the real world, because, you know, I think that oftentimes a lot of us are wrapped up in, you know, the online space, and it's very, very important, particularly in terms of connecting with folks who have this shared interest. But I think one of the things that has always interested me, and I know a past guest has mentioned this as well, like when we think about the real world with transformation, conventions are kind of like the internet if it was real. And I know that all of us have kind of gone to some varied conventions over the years. So I was curious to know a little bit more about what your experiences have been in general when it comes to meeting folks with our shared interest at these conventions. And have you found them to have been a productive space to meet others and to connect on a more personal level? I'm curious to know more about that.
I've only kind of regularly been going to conventions for a couple years now. Although I did go to one in like 2014 and did like a transformation art jam. So I have a bunch of
Yes.
sketches from back then. It's kind of funny.
And you did a picture of the group that met up, didn't you?
That one, no.
Oh, was that a different
But
one? Okay.
yeah, honestly, the only times I've engaged with transformation stuff at conventions are your panels at MFF 2019 and 2021, and then a panel that Inanimorphs did at another convention this year, which was fun. Kind of did an overview of what like transformation media was like, and had several of my pieces in slideshow, and I was able to raise my hand and say like, "Hey, that's me." So that was fun. And then I guess for me, the primary draw of conventions is meeting people that I already know pretty well online. And the transformation meetups you've hosted have been great for that. Just kind of bringing everyone together in a place, get people seated and sketching and having silly conversations. And that's wonderful. I love it.
No, I'm really glad to hear that. Obviously, this entire podcast is actually a long con to just convince everyone to go to my convention panel. So I appreciate you bringing it up organically. Um, but yeah, no, I think it's always really interesting when folks are kind of brought together in a space where they can talk about it in an atmosphere and on specific topics that they're really into. So I definitely agree there. What have your experiences been like, Cameron?
So I haven't been a very regular con goer. I think I've been to MFF twice, and then a little local con twice, and then I went to FE once this past year. So not too many. And for me, they always happen to be when life decides to kick me down a hill, or in some ways, so I'm usually not at my best, and I'm a pretty shy introvert. So usually I just do a lot of hanging out and a lot of listening to people, which I enjoy. So I kind of meet people just by listening, and I don't do too much like proactive interaction. But it can be very interesting to kind of see these people and start putting like actual faces and personalities to the online personas, which is really interesting. And it feels like the spaces are very generally safe and warm, and it's kind of interesting because, at least from my perspective, it seems like people like to talk about the sexual aspect, but they're more jokey and polite about it, and it's a lot less like actively being in your DMs horny, and it's more just making silly jokes about it, understanding that most of the other people there probably feel the same way. So I think it's a very like positive environment.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's interesting that you've kind of noticed that in terms of listening into any conversations, in terms of how they kind of talk about it in a more jokey manner when it comes to those kinds of focuses. I was curious if there's been any conversations you've ended up listening to that have changed your mind on any things.
Well, I listened to you and Anger Boda talk about the internet and areas of the internet that I had never even heard of for like an hour and a half once. And I didn't say a word. Or maybe it was just an hour, but that was interesting. I had no idea that kind of stuff was out there. Um, no, I don't think anything's particularly changed my mind. It was just kind of like confirming things that I already thought, or just kind of like seeing the people be people rather than the character limits in a message or something, which was interesting. And it made people a little more human
Yeah, absolutely.
to their dismay.
Well, I always think it's interesting to see that kind of translation of people online into in person and kind of see put not only, voices to faces, but also like mannerisms and such. Because obviously, a lot of communication isn't just vocal or, through like text, it's also like how you say it. So I think there's always a value in terms of being able to kind of see that in your interactions. And, you know, when it comes to a lot of the kind of meetups, I've always found that people are just really excited to, even if they're not speaking themselves, to at least feel seen in a way, like be it through like, resonating with something that someone is saying, or getting to just like experience the discussions uh, verbally and like auditorily, because that's such an alien experience in many ways from a lot of folks' for lack of a better term, real world life, outside of cons and outside of the internet.
Yeah, it's definitely a environment that you get to really go into this thing you clearly love that you don't ever get to anywhere else, really.
And so, one of the other things I've also noticed is, obviously there's no TF convention as much as everyone at every fur convention. I feel like someone's like, oh, there should be a TF convention. And it's like, that's a lot of work. There's a reason why that doesn't always come up. But, obviously, there's like, we have panels that touch on transformation, but they are inherently at a convention where that is not the main focus. So I was curious to know from both of you, like how you would recommend a theoretical TF fan navigate a convention where that isn't the main interest. Like, are there specific things people should do to maximize their time outside of just, going to a panel or trying to meet up with people that would really kind of enrich or make them leave knowing that they have had, a fulsome
Honestly,
experience?
those are the two suggestions I would have. It's like go with people that you plan to meet up with and you want to, spend time with. That really makes a big difference. Leave room for unplanned activities if you meet people. Like, be willing to hang out just in con spaces, and chat or draw or what have you. And, look for places where your interests might intersect with others in ways you might not anticipate. Like if you went to Tofty's panel on animal costuming in ancient Greece and Rome, you would get a lot of transformation material, because of the stories that they were depicting on stage. But you wouldn't get that from the title of the panel. Um,
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm not a great person to ask for this because most of the time at a con I'm like, okay, the TF panels this time. I will try to see if anybody's doing something else, and otherwise I'm just gonna follow around the few people I know and just see what they're up to because most of this other stuff doesn't hold that much of an interest for me. So I'm not very good
No,
at
that's fair
that.
too, but I think there's also an inherent benefit to like, reminding people that they should follow, people that they know to some degree around, if obviously if those people are okay with that. Because like you get to experience things in a way that, can still be validating. Like I know when I went to my first convention, I didn't really go with anyone that I knew outside of my partner who it wasn't like a TF person. And a lot of it was just like, okay, I have these names that I know I'd like to at least see at a distance so I can put a name to a face, or sorry, a face to a name. And, I want to like listen to these conversations that people are having so that I can like experience them in some way, even if it's like a secondhand experience. And even just that, it's a good way to kind of dip your feet into that kind of socialization. And then, maybe you can start to build up friendships that way. Even if you're just like fairly quiet, and, maybe you're not saying that much, you can still at least, I think, gain some of that experience simply by existing in those spaces and making time, like you kind of mentioned, Toledo, to have like these kind of unplanned meetups. Because I know the first time I went, I tried to go to every single panel, and it was like that's probably not the best idea. You'll get to experience some great stuff, but like if you're there specifically to meet people, you need to make time to actually have that happen in a way that might be a little bit more organic than just scheduling everything in.
I guess if you're on Twitter or something, you could always tweet out and just say like, "Hey, people, I'm here. Do you want to talk about TF or do something TF related? We got a block at this time or something, or we're hanging out here. There's an art jam going on. Everybody come
Yeah, my
over."
little art jam thing that I organized at that convention a long time ago was not official. We just like found a couple tables in the con space. We put a couple posters around, and we got like 15 to 20 people showing up for it.
Yeah, I honestly found that, especially more recently, people generally try to make like Telegram groups, I've noticed, and like we'll be like, oh, this is like the TF Telegram group for like this convention, and then
Mm,
like people will post in there and be like, oh, we're gonna have a hangout here, or like we're gonna do an art jam at this time. Who's around? Blah blah blah. And honestly, that makes a big difference as well in terms of just
planned
knowing where people are
hang-ups would
gonna
be
be.
would give you the time to prepare for them.
Yeah,
Or maybe
that's
it's a
true. That's
maybe
true.
that's a code word for fursuit to TF folks.
Ooh, that's a good point. I didn't even think of that. Honestly, conventions are often the location that I see get picked for those kinds of transformations. So, I mean, you never know. So then I guess is like kind of a last point in terms of like people who, you know, are going to a convention and maybe are interested in this topic. Oftentimes, like going to a transformation meetup is like the first time people are actually even socializing in person. So I was curious if either of you had any like tips in terms of do's and don'ts when it comes to interacting with others in these spaces, and if there's any tips that you would like to share around navigating those conversations that you think has either worked well for yourselves or you've seen work well for other people.
Start with the common ground, I think, is a good place to begin. And that's one reason I like your panel, Zil, because um, for folks who haven't attended one, Zil starts out by welcoming everyone and then just like putting a couple topics on papers and then distributing them and letting people gravitate toward the topics that they want to discuss. That is great because it just like allows people to easily get past that first stage of like I'm interested in transformation, but I don't know who all these other people are and I don't know how to like break the ice. And it also gets people who are probably going to be more comfortable with each other, talking with each other from the beginning. So yeah, that's something that I really enjoy about it.
Thank you. I'm glad. And yeah, I think having that common ground is just so key. And in particular, like at the very least, you'll know, hey, if you're into werewolves, there's a werewolf table. You can talk about werewolves, you know? So,
Exactly. Precisely.
I would say also start with your name because sometimes people don't say their name, and you're just talking to people that you can't put a name to, and that really makes a difference just kind of in your mentality. um, if you're a shy person like me, there's nothing wrong with just watching and listening and having a good time that way. Um, and speaking up if something particularly strikes your fancy or once you've kind of gotten your feet under you and you feel comfortable, especially like the first time you go. Um, and then if you're a person who is more extroverted and more energetic and more comfortable, if you can try to engage the people who are a little quieter and just ask, "Hey, what's your name? What do you think about whatever table we're at or this kind of TF or something?" That can really help them try to come out of their shell and help them engage a little bit more. But obviously, don't push it if they feel
Sure.
shy.
absolutely. I know that, like, again, having that sort of opportunity when someone outstretches the hand to like engage in that sort of way can mean a lot. And I know that there's a lot of people who come to these conventions who will actively try to do that because they've been to many of these before and they know how daunting it can be for someone who's new or shy or, you know, just doesn't have a lot of experience with this kind of stuff. So, generally speaking, I do think that people organically make those opportunities. And, you know, it's also okay to be like, actually, I'm just here to listen, and it's no harm, no foul.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, do what's comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And comfort, I think, is always just like the most important part. So, I know that previously we've talked a little bit about talking to normies about TF stuff. I know in particular we drilled into this with you, Cameron, on your episode. But I did want to kind of revisit it because I think it dovetails nicely with what kind of we were talking about in terms of, socialization with other folks. And given the importance I think a lot of people internally place on it, like there's almost a line that sometimes people feel like has been put in between what they're interested in at their core and what they present to other people. So when it comes to specifically to friends, I was curious to know a little more about what your experiences have been and if you have any thoughts as to how we should approach conversations with these kind of external people when the stakes can be really high in a lot of people's minds.
Thinking about this, honestly, it's not something that I've done much. Like, I've found talking about anthro stuff to be somewhat easier because there's almost more media that's related to it. And also, yeah, honestly, thinking about it, this is a little bit of jumping ahead. But yeah, I think that pointing out media that expresses why you're interested in it is a big deal. But in any case, I haven't spoken about it much, and in fact, I have my FA gallery and I have my DeviantArt gallery, and I've kind of made my DeviantArt gallery like the one that I will just show people, and I've limited the amount of TF on there because I'm just like, I don't know how I would quite field questions about non-furries to whom I show this gallery. It's like, why are you depicting this? It's like, because it's fun.
That's all you need.
Yeah, in some cases.
For me, like when it comes to friends, like I mean, if you think of a random friend right now, you probably know like they're into this thing and you don't particularly care about it and you don't dislike them and you don't question their friendship because of it. So with your friends, they'll probably just be like, "Huh, that's a weird quirky thing that you like, but okay." Like if they're not into it and not interested in it at all, then just don't talk to them about it, but you can still try to broach it and see if you can get them to just have a conversation with you. They're probably still going to be your friend over it. It's not, as much as it seems like a huge deal in your head, I don't think it actually is that big of a deal. And if you can share some safe for work art, it probably can just be like, whoa, interesting. But obviously don't let them find your not safe for work gallery if you're not at that level yet. So I think that the stakes really are not that high, and it's just kind of a cool, albeit strange and unique hobby, but I think it can be worth and rewarding to bring it up with your friends.
Yeah, actually thinking about it after what you said, yeah, for most friends it isn't that high. My baseline for how I prepare for these conversations is conversations I've had with family that can, under the guise of like curiosity, almost turn into interrogations. It's like where they won't accept, oh, it's fun for an answer. It'll be like, but what does it mean? Like, how is it fun? And I'm just like, I don't want to get into that right now, or it's not something I really want to just dive into without warning. But you're right. For most people, they're willing to accept you as you, and they don't demand or expect a psychohistory of your
Now I
interests.
kind of want that. I kind of want the
You want someone to psychoanalyze
well,
you?
I want somebody to be like, wait. Explain this to me. No. What do you mean? Go more in depth. I want to know. And like the fact that somebody wants to understand it that much would be like, oh, this is interesting because clearly it's striking some sort of nerve in them, whether it's a good or a bad thing. Either way, it'd be a very interesting experience to have.
It's so funny that you mentioned that. First of all, I did want to say as well, I do agree with what you said earlier in terms of it's not often like that deep for most people. It's like, oh, it's like an interest maybe you have, and people don't think that much about it. Now, that being said, what you were just referring to, my experience in terms of talking about this with people who aren't into TF has almost exclusively been that. So it's really funny that you're saying, oh, it would be really interesting. And I'm just sitting here and I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much the only
I
response
guess I'm
I've
gonna have to go
gotten.
open up to somebody at work tomorrow.
Oh,
To
gosh.
be like, hey.
At the water cooler, you're like, so, have you ever thought about growing a tail?
Yeah. Maybe I
Like,
will.
not wearing one, growing one.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean, again, I don't mind it. In fact, I've only opened up about it with people I like care about, and so that's why they've like shown so much interest in knowing more about it. Um, but it's funny that sometimes these conversations can take on more of like a let's actually really dig into why it is that you're really interested in it. And it was funny actually. One person that I did talk about this with pointed out something really interesting that I hadn't thought of before. If you tell someone like you're a furry, there are like associations with that term, but people generally like know right away what you're talking about. And if you say you're into transformation, there's a little bit more of like a okay, this isn't something I've like seen as like a fascination before. But this friend pointed out that transformation in terms of like a cultural impact has a much longer and much more in-depth history than the commonly known like association of furry in this day and age. So sometimes you do really get these insights into transformation that you wouldn't if you didn't have these conversations and didn't try to like dig into them. So if anything, sometimes they can be really rewarding in terms of learning new things about this topic that you haven't thought of before.
And like building off of that, I think that that's a great way to introduce it to someone. Like, so little side cul-de-sac that I'll come back around. There was a fascinating NPR thing years ago about the presence of quicksand as a threat in movies. Um, Cameron, have you heard this?
Not specifically, but I think I know where you're headed with it.
I
Okay,
have no idea, so I'm excited.
so this person was interested in like, okay, like there's quicksand appears as like a threat in like this very specific time period. What does quicksand mean in film? And the place where they could learn more about where quicksand appeared were people who were into it. And so these people online had just like comprehensive lists of every appearance of quicksand in like film media. And they could notice that it was like discreetly bounded in like a couple decades of the 60s and 70s and then like never again.
That went in a very different direction than I expected.
Um, but what I'm saying is that like there's a the ways our paraphilias form are culturally influenced. And so like people were in that time the researcher said like this might be an anxiety of being like trapped in a culture where you don't belong or like being unable to extricate yourself or what have you. It expresses the anxieties of the time. But like transformation as a cultural theme has been around for thousands of years. The some of the oldest art depicts these liminal beings between human and animal. Like you look back at a time where humans were kind of more aware of our place in an ecosystem and non-human animals were neighbors instead of pests or curiosities. And yeah, it's age old. Like we are participating in something that goes back tens of thousands of years. And some of the things that fascinated them about it back then fascinate us about it now. Um, and now, like, back then you might have animal transformation, and nowadays, of course, transformation into a lot of different things, including things that did not exist tens of thousands of years ago. But, we say this now, but tomorrow they'll discover a cave in Spain where they have depicted
Pool toy
like
TF.
yeah, a like half pool toy shaman.
That would be amazing.
Um,
I would laugh so hard.
someone draw that. But like, yeah, I think that's how I would go about it. It's just like these express like human desires and human interests, human yearnings that we've had since the dawn of human history, as far as we can tell.
That's a really good point, and in a sense, you can almost jokingly explain it in some ways as like, well, I'm just upholding this cultural fascination we've had for thousands of years. So, I'm just doing my part to, preserve culture.
Yeah, exactly.
I've got
I love
30,000
that.
years of history behind myself. I don't need to explain it to you.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my goodness. So then I guess, we've obviously focused a lot on like the positives that can come from it. I'm curious to know if you've had any like introductions to transformation that just went completely off the rails and went poorly in the past, because I know that that's always a concern that people have. And if so, if there was anything you learned from that experience.
No, damn it. Where's my bad reaction? I want somebody to like really fly off the handle because I think it'd say more about them than me, and it'd be really interesting to see why they're so against it. That could be a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely would. I have only had one, so I'll hold off until the end. I don't know, Toledo, if you have anything to comment on that.
Um, I guess like one of the early reactions to one of my early photo manips was that it was just freaky, and they didn't like seeing the image of someone they knew like halfway to an animal form. They kind of read the photo manipulation as a transformation. I like furries do that all the time. Like almost the only people who commission me for photo manipulations are transformation people. It's peculiar. But yeah, and what got them there was just the uncanny valley. They're used to seeing someone one way, it's creepy to see them another, and also they just did not necessarily get the interest in being something else. They have this image of you that is formed by their vision. Like they literally see you and that's what they think of you. Um, and the idea that you might want to be different is just baffling to many people. Or like what they see is not how you feel. I think that was the root of how it went wrong back then, and often the root of how it goes wrong now. And yeah, it's always, and again, that's a theme that occurs more broadly outside of transformation, comes with any form of identity exploration. Like if you have a fashion that your parents didn't approve of, or for people who are transitioning, or what have you, you run into this because people just have a very hard time with I can have a very hard time with identity or form fluidity or just like having to reorient their concept of a person.
And to the point about the uncanny valley with photomorphs, I think you bring up a good point in the sense is like if someone has a particular perception of you and then they're being confronted with something that they know is supposed to be you but doesn't look like you, it's almost like they're viewing in real time like almost like a liminal space of you for lack of a better term, and it's like weird to see that transition from the one to the other in terms of how you have seen a person and how you are now being like asked to perceive them in a way that I think throws a lot of people off.
Yeah, I think last summer when I switched sonas, oh, and I was making my fursuit. At one point, my mother asked, "It's like, so are you drawing yourself as a panther now instead of a horse?" And I was like, "Yeah," and didn't quite go into that. But yeah, there's a moment of a bit of transformation vibes right there, and having to speak about it. It's like, what does this mean to me? What is the motivation? Like, yeah,
You just ruined the fictional version that she had of you as her son.
I know, right?
I had a
Oh,
lovely horse son, and now he's a panther. What am I gonna do? How do I make
Exactly.
this work in my head?
Yeah, it's like, if you think it's weird for you, like, let me tell you how it is for me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. No, that's really interesting. I think my only negative experience was, and this I guess kind of builds on what you kind of mentioned, Cameron. The only time I've had a negative experience was with someone who initially, when I explained it to them, they feigned understanding and then it ended up being kind of like a thing that they used to kind of like poke fun at me later on. And to your point, like that almost tells you more about the other person than it does to yourself. If someone is, has good intentions, wants to be a good friend or what have you to you, obviously there can be some like poking fun in a good nature. This was not that. And so in some ways it also tells you a little bit more about the person in a way that maybe you would find out down the road anyways, and you've kind of accelerated bringing that to the forefront. So in some ways, even if it was a bit of a negative experience, it told me more about that interaction, and it was almost a signal that perhaps this person wasn't who I thought they were. So I have always found that even if an interaction maybe doesn't go as well, you at least learn something about the other person. You learn a little bit of something about yourself, and you can use that in terms of reevaluating how you approach things and who you approach with it in the future.
Yeah, that's a good point. You see how they react to your vulnerability and to your divergence from the expected norm.
Yeah. Oh
Um,
yeah, absolutely. Because it is a point of vulnerability to open up about yourself in that personal way.
well, and one time I remember it wasn't like there was a bad reaction, but it was a reaction that I didn't necessarily hope for. So the first person I dated, I like opened up about like drawing myself as a horse, and she was supportive and enthusiastic about it, which just like broke me down because I didn't anticipate anyone being that way at the time. But I later found out that before we had had that conversation, she had discovered my deviant art with all of my like transformation photo manipulations. And I
Oh.
was I was a little mortified at that moment. And we had a little conversation about transformation, and she mentioned that she had like written some things about it, but it became apparent that we had very different interests. Like things that she wrote about transformation were things where it was like expressions of self, almost maybe self antipathy, where it was seen as like a punishment into forms that she did not care for. Whereas for me, it was like, I want to inhabit these forms because I think they're really cool. And so it was a revelation that the same metaphor had very different valences, or a very different valence for someone I cared about, and that was weird. And later we, broke up, and I don't think we ever really returned to the topic. But that's an example of how it can go sideways,
Yeah, that was
perhaps.
a roller coaster.
Yeah, honestly, yeah, that is quite something, I must say. And I mean, again, yeah, it speaks to how varied the experience of being interested in these topics can be, and it can illuminate other things that you weren't aware of in the first place. So,
Wow, that's really interesting. Now I really want to meet somebody who creates their own TF media, but has that kind of, or like a very different relationship with it. Because the way you're describing it, it almost seems like they're punishing themselves and not in the like TF. I like punishment in my TF, but like I really feel wrong about this and I don't like it at all, but I still create this. That would be a very interesting in-depth conversation.
And granted, this is 15. I'm remembering a conversation that was
Yeah,
15
yeah,
years
yeah.
ago. So,
But I'm sure that there's got to be somebody out there, right? Who thinks TF is horrible and creates it as a not good horror.
I think there are plenty, honestly. I mean, one of the things that, like, I think turns people off transformation as a metaphor is how it is very often just played for horror. Think about the, donkey transformation scene in Pinocchio. Like, it was created by people who may not have liked transformation but still created it. Or if we go even farther back, donkey transformation in The Golden Ass by Lucius Apuleius. It is depicted as like something that is undesirable, and the cause of many indignities. Now, maybe someone was into that, but yeah, there are plenty of people who create transformation media for these sorts of themes.
I guess, yeah, I'm sure that's the case. I guess I'm looking for somebody who has a very personal relationship with it. Like, to me, when I think of like werewolf movies where it's a very torturous thing, or the Pinocchio scene, it seems like people are creating this to show you a perspective. But I'm thinking of somebody who like really goes into it in a personal way and is constantly doing self stuff to explore it really in deeply, or really in depth. That would be like, I'm sure that person exists, or those people exist, but it would just be interesting to see the very different relationship with it.
So if you're listening to this and that is your relationship, please DM Cameron.
Yeah, great job listening this many episodes into something that seems to bother you.
Sorry to bother you.
Yeah, it's, well played, well played. Oh my goodness.
If you want to start talking about TF conversation, there's a better time than mid-September to late October, because it is officially spooky werewolf season, and now you can just gush about how great werewolves are, and people will get on the page with you, and then you can start branching out from there.
Actually, addendum to that, like, I have never been a werewolf person, but like most of the TF stuff I've written has been werewolf stuff, simply because that is like legible to folks.
Yes.
People know what it means.
I was not a very big werewolf person either, but I just started talking about werewolves, and now I'm on the werewolf kick because one of the people I talked to about werewolves was really into werewolves. So now they kind of rubs off a little bit. But like, it's a great easy out to try to broach the topic with somebody if you're just trying to find a way to bring it up. And then the other way that I find to bring it up is to talk about what superpower you would have. And then as soon as you say shapeshifting,
yes.
You can start getting that ball rolling.
And if they're 90s kids, they probably know animals.
Yeah, that too.
That's true. That is, I can't believe that I'm surrounded by people who weren't into werewolves in the beginning. I can't believe this.
Well, I just thought they were overrated.
I'm
it's like fucking werewolves this, werewolves that. Everybody's into werewolves. Like, there are other like canids out there. Do a maned wolf. Do a African wild dog. Just do something else, please, people. And now
Okay, but also, why not both?
I mean, sure, but like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of the time it's like, oh, I could do an African wild dog, but I'm just gonna do a werewolf because it's easy and people love it, and there's that trope and blah blah blah. And it's like there's an opportunity cost to doing a werewolf.
Okay, Cameron, I am writing something that will have a maned wolf.
Yay!
In it. So
I was gonna say, as soon as he mentioned that, I was like, oh, I bet that's coming up in Toledo's thing. So
oh yes,
I pegged it correctly.
You guessed.
Amazing. Yeah, so I did want to touch on one more topic before we get to audience questions, and that's the topic of interesting anatomical changes. You know, I find that amongst all of our works, I think we as artists try to pay special attention to the anatomical aspects of transformation. So I was curious to ask you both, what are the most fascinating and or perplexing changes that you've depicted in your work? And maybe we'll start with you, Cam.
I said this one before, but I liked making my Were Pyrenees polydactyl because he had those two double dew claws in the back. So most of the interesting anatomical changes are things that are pretty unique to a species, and it can be like little weird details. Like in bats, they have the tragus, which is that little nubby in the middle of your ear. That like if you run your hand along your cheek to your ear, it's that little nub that you meet. Bat species all have pretty variable tragi. So, like, sometimes when I'm drawing bat species, I will vary the tragus because, like, oh, this Townsend's big-eared bat has this kind of tragus, and this big brown bat has this kind of tragus. So it's usually the things that are like pretty unique to the species that I like the most. Perplexing wise, yeah, I struggle with elbows. Clavicles can be really interesting because most animals don't have them, so they have to disappear. So that I can sometimes struggle with. It's like hitting that straight 50% in the middle change for me is kind of hard. And it's like either I'm gonna like start with a human base and do it that way, or I'm gonna start with a dog base or like a quadruped base or whatever, and I'm gonna like back it up. So it's because it's too difficult for me to hit that sweet middle.
Okay, so the thing that always gets me is noses. Because in the animal kingdom, humans have very odd noses. Because in part they like project away from the plane of the face. And they're kind of narrow and triangular. And getting the transition between a human nose and basically any other animal nose is really interesting to me. Oh, also, there are a lot of soft tissue. So there isn't an underlying bone, even if there is a little bit of structure. But it takes me a while to think of how that would shift. With a horse, the upper lip would swell outwards, and then the kind of nostrils would do a little bit of rotation and point forwards, and all of that. The bridge of the nose broadens and just kind of pulls the nostrils apart a little bit. As with my Sona shift, I've had to think about how feline noses work a little bit more. And of course, they're a lot wider than human ones. But then, like, a human one is kind of like a triangle with the base closest to the head. The feline one is kind of an inverted
I was about
triangle.
to say it's like you have to flip it 180.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I had to think about it. It's like, okay, why is this? Like, what are the corresponding parts? And I realized, like, with felines, they have those huge kind of bulbous upper lips. So what happens is that the lip expands and pushes the corners of the nose up so that the shape inverts while the base stands firm. And I'm like, okay, now that I've like envisioned this transformation, I can actually conceive of how a cat nose works. Um, yeah, and then just like if people get the shift in nostrils and nose shape right, it is just like amazing because you know they're paying attention.
100%. I completely agree on that one. I was going to talk about noses too, so like that was better than I would have summarized, honestly.
Hey, if you have other things to say about noses, say them.
Yeah, I think like you were touching on with the cat nose is like noses just with humans are just so much more different. And when you're doing kind of a facial morph, that's always the trickiest part. It's how do you depict the nose's changes? Like you said, like with the nostrils, they point often in a completely different direction from how they are on humans, which can be quite the struggle. And in particular, like you said, when it comes to animals that have kind of a bigger gap between the nose itself and the upper lip, it can be a bit of a challenge in terms of how are you going to depict that without either A, making the nose look wonky, or B, making the upper lip look wonky. So that is always a little bit tricky. And then I guess the other thing I'll mention, I wouldn't say they're like tricky, so to speak, from or like even fascinating to some degree from an anatomical perspective. But when you think about ears in terms of the relationship with humans versus a lot of other animals and their positioning on the skull, again, it can be a little bit, you have to be very careful with how you depict it because you have to figure out where exactly on the head they are supposed to move to. Because if you don't put them in quite the right spot, it can look really strange. So, a lot of times in photo manips in particular, you'll see ears that have been changed that are resting just where an ear would normally rest for a human. And if it is an animal where that isn't supposed to be, it looks really strange. But then the counter factual is, okay, if I put it where it's supposed to be, you have now this like skin patch where the ear was supposed to be. And it's like, do you cover that up with hair? Like, how do you like address that? Do you just fur it and that's your like excuse? It's always a bit of a tricky thing to balance is I guess what I'm saying.
Can I add a couple, just a brief notes? Another one is hips. Like the shift from a bipedal to a quadrupedal stance is like definitely located in the hips, but the hips are like really complicated and a lot of the complications are buried under layers of muscle. But some people can get it right and that's pretty amazing. And then going on with your ears, skull shapes. Humans have really weirdly vertical skulls.
We have such big foreheads.
Yeah.
Like, if you think about putting a hat on a dog, or if you want to TF somebody who's wearing a hat, it's like, what do I do with this? There's this unaccounted for space.
Yes. Yeah. Like, animal baseball caps have to be basically flat.
Yeah.
It's true. It's hilarious.
So true. Okay, yes. Those are two others that where, like, if people get them right, I'm like, yes, good.
Yeah. Oh, the forehead is a big one. I hadn't even I didn't consciously think about that, but that is another one that is often very challenging to nail properly. So completely agree
And
there.
hooves.
Oh, and the connection of the hooves.
Yeah.
Oh,
Especially horse hooves.
Yes. Oh, and the connection of the neck to the head.
that's a
And
good
this one, it shows up when you're even just drawing anthros. Because if you just put an animal head on a human neck, it looks wonky. So folks who are drawing anthros should do a little bit of transformation stuff just to figure out how that all works.
It's very true. So then, when we think about challenging anatomical changes, do you think that there are any species that are just simply too complicated or too difficult to properly portray in a TF from an anatomical perspective?
For me, yes. For anyone, no.
Okay, well then which ones are you thinking of in particular? Like which one or two stands out?
Well, you said species, so I've tried to do a bacteria before, and my style
gosh.
does not lend well to a bacteria or a mushroom or a mold or a yeast or a moss. So things that aren't very animal or are quite different from kind of your typical animals. Like, oh my gosh, I would love to see I don't know if I would love to see this, a human into a tapeworm where you have segments that fall off yourself.
Oh my.
Like, that would be really weird. And how long would you as a tapeworm be? And it would be a weird TF. That would be very disturbing, though.
Yeah, that's true.
Ugh.
How about you, Toledo?
Oh my goodness. Anything with just iterated small details is just something that I don't necessarily want to depict.
Like a pangolin or a scaly lizard or something?
Yeah. I don't have a good shorthand for rendering those. Or also birds with complex feather patterns. I mentioned this in the other episode with toucans, but one nice thing about them is that they are black and another color, and the feathers are indistinct. So,
But if you had to do a red tail hawk where the underside of them has that brown speckling and their
yes.
tails have that and their tails have a specific speckling.
Uh-huh.
Or a screech owl who's really camouflaged for a tree. So you have to
Yes.
try to make him look like tree bark.
Or one of those fancy chickens where every feather is outlined. If I'm sent to TF hell, that's what I'll end up drawing for the rest of eternity. Fancy chickens.
Yeah.
From an anatomical perspective, a lot of the things that I mentioned are just hard. I could not draw a hip shift in the way that I would want to see, just because I'm not practiced enough with the anatomy.
Yeah, you talking about noses just now makes me want to I'm just going to spend a week and only draw noses in various stages of TF.
Yes.
Because noses are so hard. It's just you know what, I'm just going to knock this out and learn how to do it.
Do it. Oh, that would be awesome to see. You have a great eye for anatomy. I really, it's always impressive.
I appreciate it because I don't feel that way, and I feel at least recently, all the noses I draw look exactly the same, and I don't want it that way. I want to depict multiple different kinds of noses.
Yes.
So I might do that.
I look forward to it. I will fave that so fast.
Cool. Then I guess I'm obligated now.
Snoots for days.
Snoots are so important.
No,
I fully support
not
this.
the whole snoot, just the nose.
Okay, fine. No, just nose is fine too.
I'm working on a sketch right now, and it's just been I'll draw for an hour and not make any progress because I'm stuck on how to do the muzzle, and I'm just okay, I'll put it away for today. I gotta practice more.
I would echo all of that, honestly. I think that, I've done my best to improve my own anatomy, but sometimes there's things that you just don't have as much experience or haven't put in as much practice to. And some of those more subtle changes, I think I still have a ways to go. So definitely echo that. My personal answer was going to be the hips. I need to do better on that, to be completely honest, and torsos that expand and like maybe like get sucked in other spaces. It's very simple to just do like a one and done, but that doesn't mean it's actually anatomically correct. And so I definitely would like to continue to put more effort into that because I'm sure I have a ways to go on that front.
Well, how hard are hips in a photo manip? That sounds like borderline impossible.
Okay, here's my trick for the times that I've done it. Use multiple photos. So like I did a very popular Husky TF years ago, like 11 years ago,
I know exactly which one you're talking about.
where the guy is scratching his own ear. And for that one, I got two different photos. I got one that I used for the upper body, and then I got one that I used for the lower body. And so with the lower body one, and then I got one for the background. For the lower body one, I just sat so the legs would be in the dog position, and I did the same with the upper body. And I combined them, and it looks impossible, but that's how it worked. And I did another bulldog one that, yeah, granted, I did not use multiple photos for that, but got into a weird pose that was easy to then like shift into looking like that. I could add a bit more curve to the spine and like pull the thigh up so it looks like it's like flatter against the torso instead of projecting it down below it, and that kind of gives that perspective. So yeah, it's photo manipulations I feel are actually a bit easier in that respect because you don't have to construct everything from scratch.
That's true. That's a good point. I'm gonna have to use that trick next time. I hadn't thought of that, but that is a very good point.
I look forward to it.
Yeah. Amazing. So I do want to leave a little bit of time here for audience questions. We did have two questions that were pitched to us from the usual suspects, and always appreciate their questions. This first one, I think, touches a little bit on kind of the things we've talked about. So we'll maybe try to not answer with anatomical answers, but Figer Fire asks, what is a detail that you've included in a piece that you feel extremely clever or proud of?
Okay, I'm going to continue on the theme that I was just using, and I'm always really pleased when I can combine multiple photos in it to look natural. For instance, there was a photo manipulation I did with you, Zil, where you're a shark and I'm an orca.
Yes.
The only problem is I am so short that those board shorts that I have on in the photo come down to like my mid-calf.
Oh my god.
So I took a photo where I was like not wearing the board shorts, and then I took a photo where I was wearing the board shorts, and I was able to combine them. But here's where the trick was. So like I had to imagine where the camera would be in the final piece, and then align it with where the different parts of my body would be in the final piece.
Oh, because you're much taller in the final piece.
Exactly. So for the picture that I took of the board shorts and my torso, I put the camera down lower than the one where I took the picture of the legs. And so that's you can play with that, and so you don't have to like create perspective. You can build it into the photograph. And it creates a really nice effect that no one notices.
Very clever.
Very, very clever. How about you, Cameron?
To be honest, this is going to be really not great of me, but if I nail hair in a piece, I get super proud of it because I struggle with hair. And that is why my current icon on Twitter is the EVTG I did, because I just fucking nailed that hair and I'm so proud. But if I had to give like an actual answer, I've only really done one main horse TF before, and I feel so proud for getting the head the way I did because it looks like it could be me in the middle of a TF, obviously, and like I feel like I did a great job getting a mid TF horse because a lot of the horse TF that I end up seeing kind of has these weird kinds of horse heads or like they really exaggerate teeth in a way or something. I just felt like I really nailed it, and I'm really proud, and I'm staring at it right now.
Awesome.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I'm
I love
almost
it.
scared to do. I want to do more horse TF, but I'm almost scared to do it because I don't think it's gonna come out this well.
Do it.
Well,
I'm
you should
intimidated.
still do it. You still got to do it.
Oh, and you know
Not
what?
every horse wins the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, yeah, but at least they're running, I guess.
That's a great analogy. I would say personally, there is a TF I did, a dragon TF, and that was definitely the most technically challenging photo manip I've ever done. But the detail that I'm really proud of is how the wings turned out in that one, because wings are just notoriously difficult to do in photo manipulation. And in particular, when you're thinking about a dragon, you have both a skeletal almost like outline, but then you have the like skin that is like making the actual wing, and that has to be a different texture and a different look from how the rest of everything looks. So it took me a while before I was finally happy with it. And in particular, there's the wing that's facing away from the viewer, and I wanted to make it so that the outline of the bone that's helping to make the membrane stretch out for the wing was somewhat visible, but not like fully visible. And that I think I actually nailed to some degree. So I'm very pleased with how that turned out. So I guess that is also anatomically adjacent, but it was a detail that I was happy with. So yeah. And so then our other question comes from Ulysses Duckler, and he asks, if you could get absolutely anyone, what famous director, author, or actor with a less direct connection to TF furries would you bring on the podcast to talk about transformation for an hour? So I guess no K. Applegates, no R.L. Steins. We got to pick someone that's got less of a direct connection.
I don't want to use a trolley answer, so just as a joke answer, J.K. Rowling, and we just kind of trash her about how cool it is.
We're just like, yeah, Draco Malfoy turning into a ferret was really the high point of the entire series.
Oh, absolutely. That was like the best part. I actually have a legit answer, and it's one that I came across fairly recently. So I would want to have Sigourney Weaver on, and the reason why is she doesn't have as obvious a connection to TF, but apparently she has such a strong love for werewolves that she has literally taken on movie projects specifically because there are werewolves in it and for no other reason, namely Cabin in the Woods, which did have werewolves in it. And I'm like, okay, I feel like there's like a tapped interest we can tap into there. And like she's also just been in so many interesting things that are kind of TF adjacent. I mean, Avatar comes to mind, Alien comes to mind. There's a lot of like vibes around there, so I feel like that would be a really interesting conversation.
You know, okay, actor, I've got one. Doug Jones.
Yes.
So he is this actor who is incredibly tall and skinny, and also just incredibly talented. So he gets these roles where he gets put into like these full body monster suits all the time. So in the Hellboy movies, he was Abe Sapien, a fish person, who is like a nerd. In The Shape of Water, he's the fish man. And in Star Trek Discovery, he is Commander Saru, who is an alien who has like kind of hoofy feet and some really interesting like body language motions. Yeah, he has played so many quote unquote monsters that are often, if not all, sympathetic in ways. So like I think it would be fascinating to talk with him about that, as well as to talk with him about the literal embodiment of these characters, like getting into the makeup, getting into these full body suits, acting in that. Like, what is it like to like dance with an actress in like a
Giant fishman suit.
yeah, in a fish person suit. And also he just like everything I've seen about him is that he's like one of the sweetest people you'll ever meet. So I think he would be a fantastic guest.
For a non-trolly answer, I might say Douglas Adams, just because I'm not as big of a reader as I used to be, so I've kind of fallen off that, and I know so little about directors and actors, but he has interesting sci-fi ideas. I really like Hitchhiker's series, so it would just be interesting to talk to him and about what he would think about TF. And then the other one I had was Malcolm Miller, the author of an anatomy book on dogs that is basically just like
Oh,
transect the biceps muscle and you will find the radial nerve running about this, blah, blah, blah. And so it's like in-depth dissection anatomy guide to learn anatomy. So just to talk to him about TF and anatomy and what kind of cool stuff or ideas he might bring to it would be kind of interesting.
Amazing. I just want to see that invite. It's just like
Yeah. Hey, Malcolm Miller, we know you're busy doing research on anatomy and stuff. Would you want to come on this podcast? We talk about people turning into things.
yes.
that would be amazing. Honestly, I would love to write that email. Amazing. Well, that was all the questions I had for y'all. I don't know if you have any lingering questions for me.
What are you going for Halloween this year?
I don't know. I haven't figured that out yet. I really should. I mean, I have both a Ratchet cosplay and a Rocket Raccoon cosplay that I can always fall back on. I might end up falling back on that again, but you never know. Maybe I'll figure out something else.
I was going to do my Gemsbach D&D character, but I've kind of fallen off the wagon on that project. Although I think I could manage maybe to finish the head and a tail by Halloween if I focused.
That's an undertaking. I can't believe you're doing that.
Yeah.
Well, currently I'm not.
No, that's true. That's true. Oh, amazing. Well, thank you so much both for coming on. I really enjoyed chatting with you both, and I hope y'all enjoyed chatting with one another as well. If folks are looking for you, where can they find you online? I don't know, Toledo, if you want to go first.
Sure. On FA, you can find me as out-of-the-box, spelled B-O-K-S, as in the antelope variety. On DeviantArt, you could find me as Toledo the Horse with hyphens between the words, and on Twitter as Toledo the Horse without the hyphens. Those are the three main places I exist online nowadays.
Amazing. And you, Cameron?
On FA, you can find me at Curious Red Fox with like the little tilde squiggle because I couldn't find the hyphen on the phone keyboard I was making the account on. And on Twitter, I'm at @A_curious_fox.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much both again, and thank you to everyone for listening to this week's episode. I hope y'all stay safe, stay hydrated, get some good sleep, and keep an open mind, and stay TFE this week. And we'll see you back again next week for more TFE goodness.
Thanks so much, Zil.
Yeah,
Thanks a bunch.
anytime.
Happy fall!
Happy fall!
Awoo!
Awoo! It's spooky season.
Ciao, folks.